Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Facebook Live class for woodland owners on our Learn About Your Land Facebook page. My name is Bill Clace. I'm a natural resources educator with UW-Madison Division of Extension. And tonight we will be talking about the 8 documents you should have as a woodland owner. We will also have our handy tip of the week, and this week it's going to be how to find morel mushrooms in your woods, and our tree of the week. Now, you can pose questions to us during the broadcast by entering them as a comment in the Facebook Live post, or send them to me by email to learnaboutyourland, all one word, @gmail.com. And so with that, I'd like to get started on our presentation and throw it over to my colleague, Christine. Why don't you introduce yourself and get started on the presentation?
Okay. My name is Christine Walrath. I'm a DNR Forester in Wisconsin, and the counties that I cover are Vernon and Crawford County. My office is in Viroqua. Most of my duties are with private landowners, but I do have a little bit of public lands in my position description. So as Bill mentioned, I'm going to be talking about 8 documents every woodland owner needs. My PowerPoint is going to state it just a little differently. It basically says 8 documents every private forest landowner needs. So I'll get started here with, I've got a PowerPoint so that you don't have to look at me all the time. So here we go. So as we've already introduced ourselves, both Bill and I. So here's the 8 documents. It's deed or deeds, management plan or management plans, property map or property maps, permits, contracts, landowner liability insurance policies, state BMPs, BMPs meaning best management practices, receipts, warranties, and manuals. This 8 documents every woodland owner needs. I took this from an article that I read on the American Tree Farm website. So this presentation that I'm doing today is kind of like I'm gearing it towards Wisconsin woodland owners. And some of these documents are going to be more like document types or categories rather than specific documents. So the takeaway points I'm hoping that everyone will take away today will be within this presentation. As I previously mentioned, there are document types or categories. As a forest landowner or woodland landowner, you may not need all these document types. And within this presentation, there'll be some that are missed. The presentation is considering that your woods or your forest is a business. And as I mentioned to a lot of private landowners that I work with, is that owning woods or forested property it's expensive. So deeds. Specifically, the deeds that we're talking about are recorded deeds. Deeds are not a title search. Basically, the title search is the documentation that is behind the deeds to basically say the deeds are accurate. Usually when you see a title search, it's almost like a book form, but deeds are like either 1, 2, or 3 pages in length. Deeds will give you the location of the property, legal description of the property, it's proof of ownership. And for those landowners that are in the Managed Forest Law program or the MFL program, you need a recorded deed as a requirement for entry into the program, or when there's ownership change for the Managed Forest Law property. So my landowner story is one when I was working in Monroe County. I had a landowner come in and he was mentioning to me that he had like 40 acres and he had deeded 5 acres to his daughter and his son-in-law. And he did it a couple of years ago. And we got talking about it, and he was talking about like having a forest management plan written and different things like that and going into the Managed Forest Law program. And he goes, he says, I'm still getting taxed for that 5 acres. I'm still getting real estate property tax for that 5 acres. I said, did you have a deed drawn up? He says, yeah, I had a deed drawn up. I said, did you record it? Nope, I didn't record it. I said, well, that's why you're not getting, you're still getting the real estate property tax for that 5 acres. So that's why I've got recorded underlined over there on the deeds area. There's other documents that go along with deeds. One is like a certified survey map or a CSM. A licensed surveyor or surveyor will record the CSM. It becomes another document that's recorded at the county register of deeds. The other type of survey map you will see is like a plat of survey that's attached to, it's either part of the deed or it's attached to the deed. It's not a certified survey map, but it is a plat of survey where it will give you where the corners are located and like a meets and bounds description. And as we like to say, good fences or property boundaries make good neighbors. The other consideration that you need to know is that all fences may not be the property boundary or accurate. My landowner story is my property. We're the second owners of our property, and our neighbors was telling us that he had to move his fence because when they started surveying out, they found out that his fence was up on the ridge. Of course, he put the fence where the easiest place was to put it, and the actual property line was approximately 75 feet down the ridge, and so he had to move that fence before the previous owner could build the house. Other documents that fall in line with like a deed category would be your managed forest law order of designation, if you're in the managed forest law, tax bills. Those are all public documents that you can go to the register of deeds. If you have a trust, that's not a deed or a document that's recorded, and I'm not quite sure if you have like a limited liability corporation, if that gets recorded. But those are other types of documentation that fall in line with the deed category. Management plan or plans. There's a couple different types. You have practice plans, which would be for like your tree planting or timber stand improvement, those type of practices that you want to do on your property. There's also landowner produced plans on the American Tree Farm System website. There's you can locate mylandplan.org, or you can just go to mylandplan.org and you can, there's a landowner can actually produce their own forest management plan. Forest stewardship plans, those are plans that are used for the American Tree Farm program and also for cost sharing. And then there's the CAP forest management plan, CAP meaning conservation activity plan. That's with NRCS for their EQIP cost sharing. So NRCS is the federal agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and their cost sharing program is Environmental Quality Improvement Program. And that's what they, where you can get funding or cost sharing to have a forest management plan, but they call it a CAP plan. And then there's managed forest lands forestry stewardship plan for managed forest law entry. And then there's also forest management plans that have to do with cost basis or timber basis. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in detail later in a few minutes. So a landowner produced plan is obviously it's produced by the landowner. This could possibly be used for cost sharing, depending on what the landowner had put in there. But more than likely, it's just probably like a starting point, so that maybe a forester could follow behind the landowner and kind of embellish the plan a little bit more. Practice plans, a DNR Forester can do that. As I previously mentioned, the practice plan is for like a specific practice. That would be like for tree planting or timber stand improvement. Then there's a forest stewardship plan. And that is something that is needed for whatever, if whenever you're going to go into pursue cost sharing, either through the federal agency or through the state agency. As I previously mentioned, the federal cost sharing is EQIP, and then the state cost sharing is Wisconsin Forest Landowner Grant Program. Understand that if you have a CAP plan done, that you have to hire a private consultant forester who has training, and the training that they have is what they call technical service provider training. Excuse me a minute. Then if you have a plan written to go into the managed forest law program, then again, that's a private consultant forester who also has training, and that training is called certified plan writer training. And then if you want to have a forest management plan compiled or written with a cost basis or a timber basis, that's a private consultant forester, because that's considered to be an appraisal, which it is. It's an appraisal not only of your timber, but it's an appraisal of your land. Cost basis are something that I feel that any landowner who's going to have a timber sale someplace within their forest management plan, they should consider having a cost basis or a timber basis done on their property to help them financially as they work through their forest management plan. Again, just a suggestion. So the other documentation that you would need is a map of your property. Sometimes you can have a property map that can be your management plan. I've done that for a couple landowners where if they were going to do some specific practice, we might have a map that just has, okay, these are the areas where this practice is going to take place. But if you do have a forest management plan, it's not considered to be complete without a property map. And most of the time, when you have a property map with the forest management plan, it's usually a timber type map that specifically states that this is, either an example would be this is aspen in so many acres, or it's white oak in so many acres. And then there are property maps, as I previously mentioned, where it's not going to be maybe timber types. It may be like your special areas, or where areas where you're going to prune, or where you're going to have timber stand improvement, or maybe even it's tree planting areas. And then, as previously mentioned when we were talking about the forest management plans, is that there's specific requirements for some. So like with the managed forest law, their maps have to be so that it's by section. So if you own acres in 2 sections or 3 sections, then you're going to have a map. You're going to have 2 maps for the 2 sections you own property in. And then there's also specific symbology that they want on that map for managed forest law. Permits. In Wisconsin, I don't think we have a lot of permits, but we'll get to that in the next area, which talks about, or one of the areas further on, which talks about the best management practices. You do need to check in the county where your property is located for specific permits or ordinances or requirements. Like La Crosse County, they have their cutting notice permit where they want you to register that you're going to be doing a harvest. It's combined with also like a forest trails permit that you need to tell them if you're going to put a new forest trail in along with your harvest. But statewide, there's no state permit for putting in forest roads, but you need to check with your county. There's burn permits for doing prescribed or controlled burns. In each county, there's, as I previously mentioned with La Crosse, there's an intent to cut, and that is to for the county to be tracking if there's delinquent real estate property taxes on that parcel. And then within the DNR Managed Forest Law program, there's a cutting notice / report form. It's kind of like a dual purpose form. And the whole reason for the form is to make sure that the timber harvest is following the plan. And what I mean by dual purpose form is you would file that form prior to the harvest, and then once the harvest is complete, you file it again. And then if you're going to put a new driveway or access point into your property, you're going to need to check with the county for a permit for that. And if you have streams that you're going to be temporarily crossing to do a harvest or some type of practice, you need to check with the DNR about navigable streams or trout waters to see if there's a permit needed for that. Contracts. I've only got 3 up here. There's probably more than just these 3 types, but timber sale contract is probably the one that I discuss the most with private landowners. And then there's also private consultant foresters have a contract when they're going to be either doing forest management plans or some type of practice for a landowner. And then forestry vendors. And when I mean a forestry vendor, that's somebody that would do like a timber stand improvement practice, or maybe a tree planting for you, or even control invasive species on your property. And as I have, my suggestion here is that whatever contractor you would have come onto your property, you should treat them just like you would if you had someone come into your house to do a building project, such as replace a roof or something like that. You need to, do your homework, make sure that in a contract that you've got all the expectations of both parties, the costs, the payments, and then have each of the parties sign. Okay, landowner liability insurance policies. This is geared more towards other states. Wisconsin has a couple of statutes that kind of protect the private landowner up to a point. So one of our state statutes is called the Recreation Use Statute. And an example of this would be, say for instance, you had like a snowmobile trail that was on your property, and the local snowmobile club had some type of agreement with you that is possible, and then someone gets hurt. You wouldn't be held liable if that person got hurt up to a point. Now it could be one of those things where somebody could prove that you had put something on the trail or something like that, but in normal circumstances, because of the recreational use statute, you would not be held liable. The other statute that Wisconsin has is our fencing statute, and that kind of describes as to who's responsible for fencing when it needs to be done on properties. As previously mentioned when I was talking about the recreational use statute, there's still potential to be held liable, so you should seek attorney's advice. On the My Wisconsin Woods website, there is a little write-up there about liability. And then I know the Wisconsin Woodland Owners Association, their magazine, they've got a section every time that magazine gets published where they have one of their members who's an attorney will address certain topics. And I know that one of the topics he's addressed in that magazine has been liability of a Wisconsin on forested lands. So state BMPs, or best management practices, you should have a copy of that. For a lot of states, best management practices for water quality, it is a law. So therefore, if it's a law, there's got to be permits that have to be filed for a harvest, for any roads, any type of activity that you do on that forested property. In Wisconsin, our best management practices for water quality are voluntary. We still have to do some checking on harvest periodically, but because they're voluntary, you don't have the permits like there are in other states. We also have best management practices for invasive species and best management practices for biomass harvesting guidelines. Two other areas that talk about like forest management. On our DNR website, we have our forest management guidelines, and then the Wisconsin Council of Forestry has some documentation on, managing forest and rules and regulations and so on and so forth. So our final document type is receipts, warranties, and manuals. And as previously said or stated, this is assuming that you're going to treat your forested or wooded land as a business. So if you're going to do that, you want to retain your receipts for goods and services that have been, in other words, goods that you have purchased and services that you have had someone provide to you. You're also going to want to make sure that you've got your warranties and manuals for any equipment that you use on your woods. And this is all, it's just good business practices. So this goes back to the cost basis or timber basis, where there is forms that you can fill out for your forested land, and that can be found on the National Timber Tax website. And there's the two. One is where you can get started, and then the other one, the two links there, and then one is where it talks about the basis, or that would be your cost basis or your timber basis. This is just, just again, owning woods or owning forested land is expensive, and this is just ways to help you out and to assist you with some of your costs that you're going to entail. Okay, so that wraps that up.
So we got some questions for you, Christine, that have come in. But let me first say that we've posted some links to some documents in the comment section of the Facebook Live event. One of them's to learn more about permits that are required. There's another one about management guidelines. And a third one is a document about having a successful timber sale that talks a lot about contracts. So if you want more information, feel free to view any of those publications. Here's a question for you. What's the difference between how I own my property now and owning it as a business?
So I guess what it falls down to, or what it goes back to, is that if you're going to have a timber sale, or you're going to be getting some type of money, or you're going to be spending some type of money, then you should be treating your woods as a business. If you're not going to be having a timber sale during the time that you own it, or that you're not going to be spending money on like tree planting practices or timber stand improvement, then yeah, just enjoy your woods for probably what you purchased it for, which is recreational property. So.
Okay. Here's another question. I just bought my property. How do I know if it's in the Managed Forest Law Program or MFL?
Okay, there's a couple ways to check this out. One way is to just call the DNR Forester who works in the county where your property is, and they can look it up on the database to see if it's in Managed Forest Law. The other thing you could do is go to the county where the property is located, the Register of Deeds, and look it up on the Register of Deeds, and they will usually have, like on the property summary, what class or what land classes that it's listed as. Now, some counties do a better job of listing it than others do, so it could be one of those things where you just might have to call the Register of Deeds and say, hey, I looked it up, but I can't figure out, how, if this is in Managed Forest Law or not. So.
And we put the link to a website where you can find the local DNR Forester that works in the county your land is located in. So feel free to use that to find who to talk to about MFL. Here's another question. Where can I get a map of my property?
Okay, there's a couple ways you can do this. If you're in a county that has, if you've got agricultural land, you could probably go to the local farm services agency, and they might have a map of your property. The other thing you could do is I know that on a couple of the county websites that you can actually create a map. So if you've got like more than one parcel, you could actually, put those parcels together and actually create a map yourself on the county website, because they've got a little bit of geographical information systems that they will allow there. Yeah, those are two places. There's probably more, but that's the only ones that I'm thinking of right now. So
The My Wisconsin Woods website, will you get a map out of that one too?
no, but you can probably get a map out of the Woods Camp one. I don't think you can with My Wisconsin Woods, but I think Woods Camp.
Okay. So the last question I see is, what can a Wisconsin DNR Forester do for me? So what can you do for someone there, Christine?
Okay, so I kind of look at it as a Wisconsin DNR Forester, such as myself. I'm not one that works with managed forest law. I'm just what they call an integrated forester or service forester. I kind of consider us to be the starting point. So if you just purchased your woods, we can do a property walkthrough. We can kind of tell you what's there and give you, we're kind of like a resource for a lot of information, just like, today as I was going through this presentation, those types of resources we can provide for you. One place where if you want to go get like a list of the services we provide is on the Forestry Assistant Locator. And then I think there's also like a web page on our DNR website that actually will say, service, DNR service foresters, and these are what we can assist you with.
Yeah, I always tell people to go on the DNR website, dnr.wi.gov, and in the search bar, type in Forestry Assistance Locator. And then it'll come up with a map of the state, and you can click on the county or choose the county that your property is in. It's really easy to use, and it's the best way to find the local DNR Forester, one of the good ways to find a local DNR Forester. Okay, that's all the questions we have on 8 documents. Thanks, Christine. Let's move on to our handy tip of the week, which is how to find morel mushrooms. And this is a good time of year to be talking about it, because April and May are when the mushrooms start to pop up out of the soil. So here's some tips on how to find them on your property or some other properties. The first thing you want to do is make sure you can identify them and differentiate them from the other mushrooms that are out there that might look like them and might be poisonous. So if you have never hunted for morel mushrooms before or not sure you know how to identify them, try to hook up with someone who does or has been hunting them and knows the difference. And if you don't know anybody, you can visit the Wisconsin Mycological Society website, and they often have forays where they go out in the woods and find mushrooms, do mushroom hunting. So it's Wisconsin Mycological Society. Just do a search for that and go into their newsletter section. You can find out when their next foray is. But it's really a good thing. That's a good starting point, is to learn how to differentiate them. And then to find them, the first place to look is under dead and dying elm, hickory, or ash trees, or in old orchards. That's tends to be where the fungus grows the most widely, is in those circumstances. Also look in on the landscape on hillsides that are south or western sloping, that tend to be warmer, and that's where the mushrooms grow best. You also want to find areas where the soils are more loamy, which is kind of a fancy way of saying it's a good mixture of sand, silt, and clay. So you get water drains through quickly and it's not too wet and it still holds some moisture. That's also where the fungus tends to grow best. One idea or one thing to look for timing wise is when the oak leaves are about the size of a mouse's ear. So just when the oak leaves are coming out, I guess it depends on what size mouse you're looking at. But when the oak leaves are really small, it's a good time to look for morel mushrooms. And the last tip I have is when the daytime temperature is about 60 degrees and the nighttime temperatures are about 40 degrees and the soil temperature about 45 to 50 degrees, that is the best conditions for the morel mushrooms to be found. So Christine, have you had any luck finding morel mushrooms?
Yeah, it's kind of sporadic. One year you find them really well and other times you don't. So
Have you tried this year yet?
no, the temperatures just haven't been warm enough in my opinion. I mean, maybe other people will find them, but I just don't think the soil's been that warm yet.
Okay. All right, let's move on to some other broad questions we have. And we got these in our learnaboutyourland@gmail.com email address. First one is, I had a logger approach me with an offer to pay $10,000 for my trees. Should I take it? And when I get questions, people ask me this question, my first response is always, no. More often than not, that's probably a bad deal for you. It sounds like a lot of money, and in fact, it is a lot of money. But if you work with a forester, you'll probably be happier with the results and get more money and achieve more of your goals for your property than if you just take a cash offer by someone that approaches you whose goals might not be in tune with what you want to accomplish on your property. Anything you want to add to that, Christine?
Yeah, just that if you know exactly what your woods is worth, it might be, but most landowners don't. It could be that there's a little pocket of black walnut over there and you're just not aware of it, whereas the logger is. So.
Okay. The next question is, what can I do to get more deer on my property? And I'm often asked this when I'm giving a presentation, and my response is look around what's going on in the landscape around you and try to do something different than what your neighbors are doing. So let's say you have a forested property and it's surrounded by agriculture, corn or soybeans or something, or all your neighbors are putting in food plots. You want to do something different so that the deer, they may feed on your neighbor's property, but come to your property for maybe water or shelter or something else. So maybe put in, if they have agriculture all around you, put in some conifer planting so they have some cover and shelter from predators. Do something different. If all your neighbors have mature forest, maybe create a patchwork of openings in your forest so that there's dense growth that deer can come in and feed. And again, you're offering something different than your neighbors have is one way to try to get more deer onto your property. What do you think about those suggestions?
No, yeah, that's spot on. All of them are.
Okay. Last question I got is, I had a branch break on one of my oak trees, and I know I'm not supposed to prune this time of year due to oak wilt. So what should I do? And this is something we're going to encounter throughout the growing season. Storms are going to be moving through your area. You're going to have some branches break. You can't really avoid it. And so the best thing you can do is try to treat that injury as quickly as you can. If it's kind of a messy break where there's a lot of branches that are all over the place and there's a big wound, maybe make a clean cut of the branch as close to the where it broke as possible, and cover that with something like a pruning dressing. Is that what it's called? Is that the recommendation that you're getting as well, or giving as well?
I call it tree wound paint.
Tree wound paint. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not just regular paint. It's something you have to get at a nursery or something, or?
No, you can find it at a hardware store. It's got almost like a thicker substance to it. I don't know exactly what is in there. I call it like a tar, but I don't know if that's it exactly, but that's how it works.
Okay. Now that's all the questions I had. Let's move on to the tree of the week. And this week it's the balsam fir, or Abies balsamea. In the picture on the left, you can see a mature balsam fir. It looks like a giant Christmas tree, and in fact, that's one of the most popular or a popular use of the balsam fir. It's a really wonderful Christmas tree. The needles are actually very flat. And if you hold a needle between your two fingers and try and roll it, it will not roll. It will, whereas a spruce tree, if you put a spruce needle between your fingers, it's more triangular shaped or square, and it in fact will roll between your fingers. So that's one way to tell the balsam fir from a spruce. Balsam fir also arranges their needles in a flat layer, like you can see in the middle picture, all in kind of one plane. I think that's to maximize the amount of sunlight each needle gets, whereas a spruce will have needles all around the branch. And finally, on the picture on the right, you can see the resin blisters on the bark of the tree, more mature trees. It's a very common feature for balsam fir. If you poke those resin blisters with a stick, this is me poking with a stick, that little bit of resin will come out, and Native Americans used to use that resin to seal their birch bark canoes. And some people in the past have used to make bubble gum or chewing gum, not bubble gum, chewing gum out of that resin. I wouldn't recommend that. Have you ever tried that, Christine?
No.
Now, balsam fir isn't everywhere in the state. Do you have any balsam fir down in the counties you work in, Christine?
Balsam fir's got down here, it's too warm. I've seen it where people have planted it in their yards, and it just has like, similar to white pine blister rust and ribes, where it seems to have like there's some other plants down here where they associate with each other, and then that gives the balsam fir diseases and that type of thing. So no, balsam fir doesn't grow very well down here. Oh. But I know up north it's a weed. So
and some people do consider it a weed. I think it's a wonderful plant. It has a lot of great wildlife value, but yeah, some people just think of it as a weed, which is too bad. Well, that's all we have for this week. Next week, next Tuesday, May 5th at 4:30, we'll be talking about timber harvesting. Thanks, Christine, for your time and information you shared, and thanks everybody for dialing in. We'll see you next week, maybe. Take care.
Okay.
And we're off.